Hello. It's been a long time since I've spoken for a video, which by the way, I thank you for taking the time to listen to this dude talk about something on his mind for quite some time now, and finally deciding to articulate it in some fashion. Now, I'm far from being any expert in the field related to this topic, whether it be sound engineering or music production, but I did want to put my pondering down on paper. And so here I am, some random ass dude who cries or wells up with emotion whenever he hears Coolin' from The Fifth Element, or the Wind Waker's Idling, or that sound from the last and in Majora's Mask, which, by the way, isn't Coolin', but I'll get to that later. My point is that there are certain types of sounds that speak to me, and I'd like to use this video to gush about what I've come to think are the sounds that consistently evoke strong reactions from me, no matter the context, situation, or overall mood. Hell, in most cases it is because of my mood that I feel so strongly about such sounds. Okay. So to try and explain the types of sounds that I love, what I mean by sounds are tones. Rings, tolls, hums, and chimes, that kind of shit. Now, if the sound enacts any of these, I will gravitate towards it. And when I started contemplating on this years ago, my first conclusion was reminiscence, which I still think is part of it, maybe even most of it, but I don't think that's all. There's just gotta be more. But I'm not here to talk about the reasons why, just the what, and see if any of you guys watching have thought the same thing, or even have a different emotional trigger through certain sounds. With that said, remember when I brought up that track Coolin' earlier? What's so striking to me about it is in fact the link, no pun intended, it has to do with Last End. That link being a sound known as Iceland, which comes from the Virtual Instruments library Distorted Reality 2 from Spectrasonics. This library, including Part 1, to me is one of the most powerful legacy libraries in my most certainly biased opinion, I'm not gonna lie there. Primarily because of its common usage throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and is still being used to this day. Though don't quote me on that. Now, depending on your age, you may or may not recognize at least one sound in those libraries. But just strictly talking about Iceland here, I'd like to name a few points where I found the effect to be used. Now that introductions are out of the way, now we can actually get to the fun stuff where I'm actually talking about the sounds and all that good shit. Like, I love this stuff, like just thinking about it and all that. So, let's get started. Starting off is this game on PC from 2000 known as Freelancer. They use Iceland in its start menu. Then there's Ikargua on the GameCube, a short but very sweet dev logo theme that goes as quickly as it comes. Next, there's Final Fantasy XIII. A track known as Dust to Dust uses Iceland near the end for just a little bit of ambience. Zelda is also another example that uses Iceland even more than once. Thankfully, more folks are becoming aware of it, which is awesome. But the wondrous sound is also used in Wind Waker for the warp that you take after beating a boss. Which I have to add that Wind Waker has some of its sound direction centered around this beautiful type of tone, which would partially explain why it's my favorite Zelda game. With that said, I'm also beginning to realize that my love of media has a good chunk of it come down to how whatever I'm watching or listening to sounds in general. Going back to The Fifth Element, it also just doesn't use Iceland for Coolin'. It's a goddamn character theme, dude. Funnily enough, that character being the movie's very name. Hell, I'd go so far as to say that Iceland is the theme of The Fifth Element, and I absolutely love it. And yes, I mean the movie too. It became one of my favorite movies after watching it again at a very blissful time in my life recently, but that's beside the point though. Hello again, real quickly I'm here to make an editor's note about the theme of The Fifth Element being Iceland 1. The Iceland 1 sound effect specifically, and I don't think that is the case anymore because I had recently just found out that it could possibly be another effect, which would be this one. And it is known as Elves, still from Spectrasonics Distorted Reality, but I just wanted to make that clear, so that's all I wanted to say. Back to the video. At this point, I hope it's clear that I love this virtual instrument. And I do. It is my favorite sound, by far, over everything else I bring up after this point. It is this sound. Also, it is from Iceland, where I believe my sound trigger, the term I'll begin using for this idea, stems from, and where all my other favorites fall in line like a smooth flowing river. Did you know that I love the Man of Steel film? I dig it, like a lot, and half the reason for my enjoyment is its soundtrack. The whole thing feels like a varied river. It's still a river at the end of the day, but it goes from extended leisurely streams to harsh crashes in between that don't actually endanger you, but add just a little punch to your relaxing stroll, like a random encounter in an RPG. And guess what? There's an ethereal sound used as a theme in there too. I've come to call it the cosmic hum. And if there's an official name to it though, I would love to know. Like Iceland, I get all feely whenever I hear the sound. Ethereal in its execution, using what I assume is synth or MIDI to just lullaby me into space. And that's the word to express my thoughts on all these sounds. Ethereal. Also crystalline, because you'll hear this type of sound being used for icy or crystal themed stuff, just higher pitched. Anyways, the Man of Steel hosts the more somber side of the tone or hum, whereas another piece of media I mentioned earlier, the Wind Waker, hosts more uplifting types. Now this one, the Wind Waker, is something special. But I'm not here to talk about my favorite games though. I'm here to talk about my favorite sounds in my favorite games. Now don't get me wrong, it does hold some somber tones. For instance, the basic cave theme and the cave shrines before the Earth and Wind Temple. I picture these tracks to be a reminder of the link to a world that once was. A small whisper of a reminder that you are in and about to head deeper into a lost world. And I love that, partially because of the contrast with other sounds. Ironically, from another link to Sunken Hyrule, the Wind Waker itself. This sound, coming from Mystic, another part of the Distorted Reality library, screams joy. Just begging you to go to town with it. Like a friend telling you, let's fucking do this, my guy. I often swing from the different measure tabs just to hear the ambience, which in the game itself is complemented by a bass hum, whereas the original sound is just raw crystalline energy. For fudge's sake, even the cave exit warp sound sings to you. I swear, I love this game to death. Big shocker here, but Distorted Reality 2 was used in this game as well, but not for the track I love, as far as I know. I could be wrong, and I wouldn't be surprised. No. To get to the point of what I'm talking about though, my love is for Palace of Twilight's theme, or more specifically the outer section before you actually enter. The synthesized tolls surrounded by twinkling drops gives a similar vibe to that of Last End actually, only a bit less dire. And my main focus though are the tolls themselves. It sounds as if you're hearing a bell toll, but not the initial impact, only the spreading ring. It's entrancing, only complemented by the drops and haunting chants meeting with the tolls in harmony. Talk of the track Palace of Twilight has me mentioning tolls and twinkles, which when you think about it does fit the theme and feeling, at least for me it does. But it isn't the only track with such sounds. No, Mirror of Twilight exemplifies this feeling even more. Same with Midna's Sacrifice, the latter of which I hold with high regard right next to Palace of Twilight. The chimes singing along with the MIDI pulls all of my heartstrings every time I hear it, no matter how many times. Also, since I've brought up MIDI a few times, let me say that I personally find it very heartwarming whenever I hear these electronic instruments. More than likely because I grew up hearing them, but I still stand by my thought of it being up there with live orchestra, standing side by side, which I'll admit is a bias, but something I still stand by nonetheless. Now, these past few sounds may have departed a bit from the somber pull of Iceland, however, they still hold the heart, that being the ethereal pattern at its core. I'd like to return a bit though, with a few more or less chipper but still warm tones. For instance, the best goddamn console startup in gaming history. the PS2. A short but very sweet tune that some find eerie, which, to be fair, I do get to some degree, but me, I feel like I just returned home, welcomed with open arms, whereas the messed up disc screen has me heading back out towards the unknown, a very bittersweet feeling with a hint of resolve. Now, if there's one thing I've learned about regarding my favorite sounds, it's that there's an entire music genre dedicated to that ethereal crystal feeling, and that's the ambient genre. Now, to be clear, I may only listen to one artist, Steve Roche, but honestly most, if not all ambient music I hear is incredible. But what I've heard from him specifically is consistently amazing, some even sounding like a variation of the PS2 startup. Turn to Light, the track you're hearing right now, is what I've been listening to for most of my time writing this script. It's also great for reading, gives it a very otherworldly experience. Then there's also Dream Body, a track I used to meditate with a long time ago. And finally, Closer, the closest, no pun intended, I've heard to Iceland in terms of raw feeling. Now, while I may listen to Turn to Light when doing various things, and Closer makes waves similar to Iceland, nothing compares to one track that I actually have a hard time listening to, because it evokes such strong emotions whenever I even hear a whiff of it. Beyond, my favorite in the ambient genre and my favorite animated short film from the Animatrix. It's been a hot minute since I've listened to it all the way through, so now that I think on it, it'll probably kill me when I do now. With that said, Beyond, especially when coupled with the animation, is an experience. Even the track alone takes me far, far away, so I usually have to prepare myself whenever I want to listen to it. Beyond, let alone the Animatrix itself, holds a special place in my heart. Okay, bear with me on this one because I'm still recovering. In fact, I don't think I'll ever recover from Clannad specifically. Anyway, fantasy is a great example of why I love synthesizers and MIDI, and also captures the ethereal nature of Iceland itself, and thus captures my heart. There's also another track from the anime that's actually worse for me, but I am not going to subject myself to that, so I'll just bring up its name. It's known as Snowfield, and you can look it up, though at your own risk, however, as the comments on any video related to this anime will have heavy spoilers, so take severe caution if you're not keen on that. On a lighter note, Final Fantasy X is very close to me, its soundtrack playing no small part in causing such a feeling. Macalania Woods from Final Fantasy X, while MIDI, does bring a hint of orchestra into the mix. With that said, the long hum of the strings accompanied by the constant higher tones, shorter breaths, and tones wrap around that ethereal crystal so softly. The piano audibly telling me what that track feels, a somber resolve. I can listen to it on repeat for who knows how long. The same goes for a track known as Fantasy, or Illusions, depends on where you find it. Except while higher toned, just as much speaks of a longing. Hell, at times I can almost hear someone like Yuna singing along right next to the Albed Inn, before she separates from the gang on the glacier before finding Shiva. Again, long tones accompanied by higher pitched twinkles, and while it does have a hint of ice, it's just screaming the longing I mentioned earlier. While those two area themes maintain a tight grip on my emotions, the full soundtrack just has me in general. From Yuna's determination in the Calm Lands, to the one effect I hold to the same standard as the soundtrack itself, and that is the sound of the Pyreflies. A song every time you kill a fiend, and a lullaby when recording your very memories. The last, but certainly not least example I'll gush about, is related to the very sound I've been using to accentuate each subject's title. And that is Final Fantasy XIII's sound library and soundtrack. This sound library, managed by Tomohiro Yajima, is the first thing that comes up when I think of crystal-themed sound effects. And to be clear, I'm speaking on the UI effects alone. Just don't even get me started on Masashi Hamauzu's full debut. Now, while Final Fantasy XII does come close wearing the ethereal crystal like a fitting suit, this is considering the fact that Yajima-san was the sound director for that game as well. 13 instead takes this ethereality and injects it into its veins. And it always brings a smile to my face whenever I hear those sounds. It's what pushed me to do those 2 projects I made for the Final Fantasy VII remake. The Iceland in Final Fantasy XIII is potent indeed. Throughout my life, I've been exposed to beautiful sounds. And thankfully, I've had at least some idea of what sounds I gravitate towards during the latter part of my growing years. However, I am only articulating this idea here and now. There are many other pieces of media that I hold close because of the beauty in their sound, whether it be through its environment, music, or both. From Mobius Final Fantasy and Sunshine, to The Witcher 3 and The Path of Neo. Because of this video, I may actually end up doing what I should have been doing years ago, and that's listing every different encounter I have with my sound trigger. With that said, if you know of your own sound trigger, I'd be curious to find out. Or if you aren't aware, find out if you're interested. Never hurts to learn more about yourself. And once again, I truly do thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about this subject that I'm particularly passionate about in some form or fashion. And especially if you made it this far, a genuine thanks again from me, and I hope you have a good day. Take care.